All right, now we're getting into the good stuff, the 10-mark questions. The first one being that given the increasing frequency of flooding in the UK, discuss with reference to the data whether the government should increase its expenditure on flood defense systems. I'm looking at this, and we've got the grid breaks down as 2 marks for AO2 context, 4 marks for analysis, and 4 marks AO4 for evaluation. And so the way that I would suggest that you answer this is keep it focused on market failure, because it's basically saying, should the government increase its expenditure on flood defense systems? Well, is there a market failure? If there is, then there's a good argument for the government getting involved in providing some of these systems. And so the way I would outline this is to say, is it market failure? What type of market failure is it going to be? And we're talking about flood defense systems, so I would suggest, I think the easiest way to do this is to go down the line and that it's probably a public good, because we know that flood defenses are non-rivalrous, and we know that they're non-excludable. It will not, so if not, basically if we're saying if we did not provide these defenses, it would not be provided by the market mechanism. I'm looking for things in the context that you could look for that. Just the fact that it's a flood defense system and so many people would be affected by it, you could say that's the extent of its non-rivalry. Is that building the flood defense system would affect however many 1.7 million houses in the UK that are at risk. Would be a good way of putting in some context there. You could also put in the fact that that it prevents the cost of the cleanup, and a lot of people were using the data about the cost of the economy and the cost of actually producing it. All those things I think are very relevant. Now, because it is a discuss question, there are 4 marks available for the evaluation, and that's why we're going into this whole thing about the but. So why would it not be a good idea to spend the money on these flood defense systems? So a few things you can think about is that it's very expensive. You think, what is the opportunity cost? What could the government do with that money if it put it towards other resources? You could say that maybe it's not going to be very effective, depending on how well it's built and where it's built. It may you could really spin that yarn out to say that it might work for like a 50-year flood, but not a 100-year flood, something like that. I'm thinking to myself, in New Orleans, they've got lots of flood defenses, but when Hurricane Katrina hit, they didn't work, so essentially they weren't very effective. I think something that would be really interesting to talk about is this idea of moral hazard. So if you build a flood defense system in a place, that just actually encourages, or possibly it just encourages more houses to be built in that area, which then actually just makes worse the problem. So I quite like the idea that moral hazard being changing people's incentives, and if you build the flood defense system, you're not going to have the 1.7 million homes at risk of flooding. You might have something like 3 million homes, and then it actually makes the problem worse if any of the other things about the effectiveness of the systems or anything falter. So what you're looking for with that is you're just trying to contextualize it. So like we said, making the context of the case study about the flooding, and then explaining a clear chain of argument to analyzing the advantages and disadvantages of putting together that sort of scheme. I think that the easiest way to do that is to do with public goods, and then a critical evaluation is how you get those marks in the evaluation section, listing both the disadvantages and the advantages, and really making some sort of clear judgment as to which you think is the better argument, and whether or not the government should spend that money on the flood defense systems.